Good morning, good afternoon, boys, girls, in-betweens on the aboves, AP here, and in this video, we're going to talk about the future of the Creative Assembly. But to unlock that video, commit Total War on the like button, and maybe you'll unlock my future. So in the past, the Creative Assembly has been mainly a Total War developer, with a console team that puts out a couple of very memey titles, except for Alien Isolation and Halo Wars, which were pretty good. And those Total War games have been released in 2-year increments. So you had, for example, Shogun 1 and Medieval 1 in 2-year increments. You had Rome 1 then released in a 2-year increment, and Medieval 1 released in a 2-year increment, and Medieval 2 in a 2-year increment. And between each one of those main games, you had expansions released. So between Empire and Shogun 2, you had Napoleon. Between Shogun 2 and Rome 2, you had Fotis. Between Rome 2 and Warhammer, you had Attila, etc. Two more important features was they were terrible DLCs, and they didn't really add very much to the games, like the unit packs or like the Hattori clan, which was like one clan for Shogun 2. And each game made the previous game obsolete. So when Medieval 2 came, most of the players stopped playing Rome 1, switched over to Medieval 2. There was a small but core group of players that kept playing Rome 1, but most of the players switched over to Medieval 2. And then when Empire was released, most of the players stopped playing Rome 1, Medieval 2, switched over to Empire. Then when Shogun 2 was released, etc. Then when Rome 2 was released, so on. Now, what is going to be the change in the Total War formula going forward? Now, the Total War formula is going to metamorphosize over the next 4 or 5 years. Is going to look fairly different. And when Warhammer 3 releases, after that is going to be the release of the next historical, and then after that is going to be the release of whatever Sophia is working on. And they should be 1 year to 1.5 years apart from each other. But the major difference between Warhammer 3, the next historical, and then whatever Sophia is working on, is going to be that these 3 games will not be competing with each other. It's going to be like the Paradox model. So for example, with Paradox, EU4 does not compete with Hearts of Iron, does not compete with Stellaris, does not compete with Crusader Kings 3. And that's very much the model that CA is going to go for. Warhammer 3 will not compete with the next historical, will not compete with whatever Sophia's working on. And so you can think of each of these as a separate product category. Fantasy, historical, Sophia. And the gap between each fantasy to fantasy, historical to historical, Sophia to Sophia, will be 3 to 4 years. And the reason why it will be a 3 to 4 year gap is so that they can continue to develop each with DLC. Well-priced, nicely lucrative DLC. Now, currently, this little DLCs are $10, big DLCs are $19. But I do not think this is where the price has settled. I think it's going to continue to increase. The price will continue to increase, and they're probably looking to settle where the price is currently with the CK3 and EU4 prices are. So we might be looking at something like $15 for the little DLCs and maybe $30, $25 maybe for the big DLCs. Of course, this won't happen in a big jump, right? We said in the last video, it's going to be boiling the frog. So every time there is a little bit of hype, they'll push the DLC price up by $1. Every time there's a little bit more hype, they'll push the DLC price up by another $1. And that way it will continuously push up the DLC price until you've been boiled by like a frog. Now, lest my friends say, well, there's not enough variety or things like that in historicals to be able to do this with a historical game, I want to show you some really interesting stats between Warhammer and Rome 2. And I want to show you that actually Warhammer 2 and Rome 2 have really the same stats for when it comes to average playtime and median playtime. And Rome 2 didn't even get good DLC. Rome 2's DLCs were terrible. Now, of course, there's some counter arguments to be made about, Wales playing Rome 2, whereas a lot of other people playing Warhammer 2, but then there's counter arguments to be made to those counter arguments about... My point is, if the core Western audience buys into a historical, there is a really good chance that this DLC model will work, and they will pay hand over fist for that DLC model. Now, there's a third team that I've been watching very consistently, fourth team, and that team is the console team. The console team basically is responding to a directive from Sega that came in 2020, and that was that Sega wants to expand into already established markets. Sega didn't have anything in the most lucrative markets, which was shooters and action games, and that's why it kind of morphed Yakuza into a certain way, and etc. But one thing it wants to do is make its established studios put out established genre games. And so what you see is from 2020 till now, an absolute ballooning of the CA staff. It went from 400 people in 2020 to 800 people today. And the console team is continuing to hire. The console team is, of course, the people who don't work on Total War. And they announced that they're putting out a new IP. They've teamed up with the same people who made the development tools for Halo Infinite and for Call of Duty Black Ops 3. And they've announced a first-person shooter sci-fi new IP, and they are going all in for this new first-person shooter IP because that is what Sega wants them to do. So within 3 years, there should be a release of a massive first-person shooter IP from CA, and CA should then split, if it's successful, into a half Total War, half kind of first-person-y, shooter-y, very console-y development team. So putting all that together, CA has basically completed joining what I call the entertainment industrial complex. And if you want a lot more to know how the entertainment industrial complex works, I would suggest watching somebody like Jim Sterling. And the way the entertainment industrial complex basically works is you design games to get people hooked, to buy more additional content so that they play more, which gets them more hooked, and that getting them more hooked gets them to buy more additional content, to play more, to get more hooked, to buy more additional content. Games are basically designed to sell you more game because there is the whole profit motive. It's not the entertainment motive. The point of games for corporations is not to make and sell games to entertain people. The point of corporations is to make money. And so games is the way that you make money. Now, I've stated many times, this doesn't make CA evil, it makes CA a corporation. And you can't really critique CA if you're not willing to critique the entire system. But that's where it makes serious cognitive dissonance for me. Because I've always been critical of the system. For me, the system doesn't work. The system is fundamentally, entirely, at its core, at its root, broken. To be clear, I'm not a virulent anti-capitalist. I believe there's ways to have free enterprise and private property, but the current crony capitalist, consumerist way of doing it with giant corporations in bed with huge governments that system is just absolutely demolished. And fundamentally, what you have in the entertainment industrial complex is consumers being incentivized to play tons and tons and tons of games, so they buy more content, so they play more games, so they buy more content, so people get rich. And it's business partnerships on multiple levels which allow this system to perpetuate. It is the studios that develop the game, it is the big businesses that fund and publish the games, and it's the small influencers who become unknowing, often, marketing agents of the games. So I think it's time for me to put aside veneers of neutrality, and it's also time for me to make certain decisions.